Hi everyone, so I want to talk about the weapon choices for the GoD Demon Hunter specifically. I did cover this in the guide, but here I'm gonna go more into details, and this is also by far the #1 question I keep getting, so I hope I can bring a little bit of clarity into this, because people are not even sure about what to roll, or even what weapon to wear, and there are actually a lot of choices, and they are good for different playstyles, and also at different stages of the gearing process and so on, and also depending on if you go groups or not. So yeah, there are a lot of things that come into play for this, and I hope I can just bring a little bit of light into this. So let's start here. We have all the weapons that are relevant and the Quiver. We have the Valor's Bequest, the Ballista, Odyssey's End, the Dawn, the Fortress Ballista, the Yang's B-Curve, and the 9 Series Satchel. And everything else you can pretty much disregard. So yeah, maybe super early on when you're just gearing up and so on, you might not have a good weapon or whatever. You can wear anything. But as soon as you get any of these, basically, with a good roll, you're just going to keep going with this. And then later on, you can maybe swap it around. So also one thing about Calamity is, do not use it. Not only did it get nerfed to death many years ago at this point, but it also bugs out your momentum stacks. So just don't. Okay, so with that out of the way, there are the main distinction between one-handed and a Quiver plus dual wield is that the dual wield is stronger in Foreman when you have someone giving you crit buffs, especially Ice Blink, but also the support Demon Hunter, for example, gives you 8% crit, so in total you can get 80% just from the Demon Hunter, and you also have Necros that can give crit buffs and so on. So this typically puts an advantage for dual wielding, and this is the reason why people dual wield in Foreman speedruns. For solo pushing, you generally want to go with one-handed plus Quiver, because you can roll better stats basically. So when you have a one-handed weapon, you want to roll 10% damage. This also applies to two-handed weapons, by the way, because 10% damage gives you a nice damage boost. So you would have something like this Odyssey's End here, for example. And this could also just as well be the Valor's Bequest, for example. And then you get the best roll like this, and after that you want the area damage. So this is actually a perfect roll of a weapon. Just the secondary is a bit weak, but otherwise this is exactly what you want for one hand plus Quiver or two hand plus Quiver. For dual wielding, however, you want to not roll 10% damage. It's fine if you get it, it's not bad or anything, but there are better choices. And the reason is that on dual wielding, these damage values and also the attack speed values are local. They are tied to the weapon itself. And this makes it though that it only has half the value, and there are simply better choices like area damage, cooldown, and even elite damage that you want to roll when you're dual wielding. So the best roll you can get typically is cooldown plus area damage, and then you have the third roll for cooldown on your shoulders, and this will cover all the cooldown you need, and you can just go full area damage everywhere or physical damage on the rings, and that will be quite nice. If you do get attack speed on one of your weapons and you can't roll it off, it doesn't really do anything. So in almost every case you should roll off the attack speed when you're dual wielding, because it's pretty much a wasted stat. And if you get damage roll, it's okay, as I said. So you can kind of compare this to something like an area damage roll, but it's a bit weaker. There is also an argument for wearing dual wield when solo playing, and this is mostly because the Quiver is extremely hard to roll. So you can gamble, like hundreds of thousands of shards to get anything like this. And I actually got a really lucky one here. I feel like I was quite lucky with, 300k shards only. So typically I would expect a Quiver like this to be 500 to 1 million. So with the general item rolls out of the way, which weapon do you really want to use? So when you do 4-man speedruns, you typically want to wear a Squirt's Necklace, so you need the Fortress Ballista to protect it. And the normal combo is Dawn plus Fortress Ballista and then the Quiver cubed. So this is the typical build for speedruns in groups. And then for solo you have quite a lot of options. So you do have the Valors, you do have the Ballista. Both of them are extremely strong. In fact, I would say that the Ballista is stronger than Valors even. Even though you're missing one primary, on this Valor you could actually roll off the strafe damage and get another useful stat like 10% damage, for example. For my roll, I just had such a bad damage roll that it was actually better to roll the average damage higher for me. But typically you want to roll off the strafe damage here, and this will give you an extra stat, which is quite nice. And the Ballista has the effect that you also get this PS. It's basically a smaller version of the Valor. And compared to a normal crossbow that doesn't have any affix, Ballista does give you a little bit of a damage increase that is somewhere in the range of 5 to 10%, so it's actually quite good. And the Valas, also with this piercing effect, gives you a damage bonus of roughly 20%. So this only applies in like medium size to big density. So when you have like 10, 15 targets or so or more, then you can expect a full gain or close to the full gain that you can. And when you have single target, you have 0 gain from Valas Bequest besides the extra stat. So this is kind of like the ballpark numbers. And the good thing about Ballista is that not only do you get more procs than any other weapon, but it also deals much more damage per shot. So with the internal cooldown of 9 frames of the 4 pieces set, you can get only so many hits in. So even if you have the perfect breakpoint and so on, you do not always get the shot off at exactly 9 frames, because there's travel distance of the projectile that plays a role, and your positioning and so on. So even with the perfect 9-frame breakpoint, if you reach that, which is possible with a crossbow and with a bow, it's not possible with one-handed because they're too fast. You still don't always get exactly the right the frame basically. But Ballista, and especially Vala, does make it a little bit more likely to close the gap between your shots, so that you get closer to this perfect 9-frame scenario basically. With Valas, this is especially pronounced because when you pierce with all strafe projectiles, so when there's a pull of like 10 more targets, your arrows will just keep flying through them, and this will make it so that basically whenever the cooldown is ready, you immediately proc another 4-piece projectile. And this is why Valas is used in the first place and why it's actually doing so much. Because a strafe projectile that pierces something can still proc a 4-piece generator from hitting a target further behind. And since it takes a few frames to actually travel through the pool, you almost always guarantee your perfect 9 frames. Unfortunately for Ballista, you have an internal cooldown that destroys this effect a little bit, but it is still noticeable, it's still there, and it gives you a little bit of an increase. The bad part of Ballista is, well, it's actually good and bad, is the freeze. And if you get a perfect Ballista, you should be able to roll it off. I'm exactly not sure, but it has the effect that you have trouble making pulls. It has the bonus that you actually survive in those pulls once you made them rather easily, because freeze is actually very strong and stuff just doesn't attack you very much. So it has upsides and downsides, and I would say you can definitely try Ballista if you have a good one, and it could be good nice, especially on like a little bit more casual level, and it's gonna help you a lot to survive, and it's a rather strong choice. I do believe actually if you do speedruns with a monk that can give you shields, Ballista could be the best option, because there you don't really care too much about the freeze, and you can still run squirts, and the monk can protect your squirts without the Fortress Ballista, so this should theoretically be the strongest option for that. Okay, then we have Odyssey's End. Odyssey's End is extremely strong with the buff, but it's very hard to play around. So this is actually my preferred playstyle, but I don't think it's going to be the best playstyle, at least on season. For non-season, I do believe that Odyssey's End is the strongest, simply because the buff is so good, and you can get to a 9 frames breakpoint if you remove the attack speed from Paragons, and you have a maximum 90% quiver. So like this, you have the perfect breakpoint, and this can definitely be a very, very strong setup. And I will definitely try this when I roll my character over to non-season, so in 3 months or so, and we'll see if that actually holds true. But I do believe that we'll see Odyssey's End be played the most at the high end. For season, the reason why I think it's not that great is because you have to do a lot of movement back and forth to prepare pulls for the seasonal theme, and also on the casual end, I think that you will probably struggle playing this build properly, because you really have to time your stuff really well with swapping the generators back and forth and so on. In my opinion, this is really fun. I really enjoy that playstyle, but it is hard to execute very well, and if you don't execute it well, you will lose out compared to the other choices. And now finally the Yanks. I get a lot of questions about this one. I do use it for T16 especially, because it has a lot of resource cost reduction. So you don't really need stuff like Fortress Ballista and Squirts and so on. You can just wear Yanks, Cube Dawn, whatever, and you're good to go for T16. And here you can just spam everything. You never run out of resource. This actually seems to be quite some trouble. If you don't want to wear the Yanks and still not run out of resource, make sure you have the Blood Vengeance passive, and maybe don't strafe forever when there's like, no density around. But typically Blood Vengeance and maybe, one or two resource rolls will, cover it. So yeah, if you don't want to do this, then just go Yanks, and this is really useful also for support DH. And then for the Quiver, you can run dual wield and Quiver cubed in solo as well, but it's not the best option. It's behind by, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10% or so, because the stats you can roll on the Quiver are really nice. So with hanging arrow damage and with the crit chance and so on, you can get, and the fact that you can also roll the 10% damage on a weapon at full value just makes Quiver a really nice choice for solo, and you should try to get one. But obviously it is by far the hardest item to roll out of all of these choices, and if you don't get a good one, just cube it and dual wield. So this is fine, but stick to the same rules. That is, the area damage and cooldown rolls is the best. You don't really want to roll attack speed, you don't really want to roll the 10% damage and so on. And the question of the Quiver also brings us to the attack speed breakpoints. So which breakpoint do we really want to go for? There's a list of the breakpoints, and you want to make sure that you are either at exactly the 9 frames breakpoint when you have a two-handed weapon that includes bows and crossbows, or you want to go for the 7 or the 6 frames with a one-handed weapon. And typically when you go for the 9 frames, you have to roll one item with attack speed for a crossbow, and you have to remove Paragon attack speed if you have a bow. And your Quiver can only be 90% maximum, because this kind of just barely puts you in the 9 frame breakpoint, and you really don't want to go to 8, because this is pretty much the worst case scenario where you are just too short on the cooldown of the strafe, but you can't reproc the 4-piece bonus in time. So make sure, if you run Odyssey's End especially, that you don't have too much attack speed, but otherwise you should be fine. And for the one-handed, or especially dual wield, you basically never want to roll any attack speed, because you can't get the next breakpoint with only one roll. So this is pretty much impossible. And for the one-handed plus Quiver, this is doable though. So it's actually quite easy as long as you don't have a really bad Quiver. And if you do, you can still run the enchanters in solo, and that works. And like this, you can boost the DPS a little bit. And one breakpoint, going up one breakpoint or so, seems to be roughly a 5% DPS increase. So this is useful. This is what I would recommend, because the 5% increase also means more healing, it means more stricken stacks and so on. And just overall, it seems to be fine. You don't have to do this with a Valas bequest, however, because Valas will almost automatically put you at the perfect 9 frame cooldown every time, no matter which breakpoint, no matter what, because of this piercing effect, in at least in density. So and this is where you care most about on the Rift Guardian. Valas doesn't really add anything besides the extra passive, but this is it. And you might be asking, why do I even say that it's only like 5% per breakpoint or something? Where do those numbers come from? Well, there is some testing that my Calamity Nova has done on this, and he actually has a script that can count the resets of the Wrath of Clarity, and this is how we did this. So he went into an actual rift, and he recorded his footage, and then analyzed it, and he basically counted the procs per second. And like this, we have a little bit of actual data of actual runs, and this helped us to find these values basically, and also to come to those conclusions now. Overall, to sum this up, we can say that dual wielding is going to be mainly a group thing because of the crit buffs, and then one-handed plus Quiver or two-handed plus Quiver is going to be mainly used for solo. Odyssey's End should theoretically be the strongest setup, especially when you reach the right breakpoints, but it's kind of hard to play, so it's a challenge. And also the season theme disadvantages it a little bit. So this is more like a non-season thing right now, or maybe in the future. The Buritza is a very nice choice. You don't really have to care too much about it. It also gives you lots of defense. But if you try to go to the really high tiers, I would advise against it because of the season theme being impacted a little bit negatively, because stuff gets frozen all the time and you want stuff to follow you for the season theme. So Valas Bequest is a very strong choice. Roll off the strafe if you can. And this is overall, a choice that's easy to play and should be also the strongest at the high end, and just overall solid, even if you don't play around season theme very much. And then we have Fortress Ballista, which I would suggest, especially for the super casual low end, because it gives you lots of defense. With the shield, you can actually survive much more easily. And then also for the very high end in solo pushing, because you can get the squirts again. So when you have, just put like 15k vitality or something, or 10k, and then on top of that you have like another 30k dex or something like that, you can probably keep up the squirts quite reliably throughout the rift, and that should help you. And also, it's quite easy to keep up the squirts for the rift guarding fights with this. So this also helps you, even if you drop the squirts quite often during the rift, to get a little bit out of it. Dual wielding is an option in solo as well, but typically you want to avoid that, because having a really nicely static quiver is a little bit of an advantage, but not by too much. So it doesn't really matter if you have really good, nice weapons and a bad quiver, then just go with it, and this is going to be fine. And for the item rolls, if you have a quiver equipped, you always want to go for 10% damage. You don't necessarily want to go for attack speed, unless you really need a breakpoint somewhere, especially with crossbows. And then for dual wielding, try to avoid the damage and the attack speed rolls on the weapons, because then like cut in half for the overall value. And then you just want to go with like stuff like a cooldown if you need it, or area damage and so on. Two things I want to add here for the end is the belt and the quiver, the legendary rolls. And you have to know that for the belt, 3% on the affix is roughly 1% DPS. So you can kind of like, estimate the gains or the losses from, comparing different belts in that way. And for the quiver, it's roughly 7% on the affix for 1% DPS. And this can maybe help you to compare the items a little better, because it doesn't really tell you exactly, how much more damage you gain or so. So keep this as a rule of thumb. And like this, you might have an easier time. And other than that, the video got a little bit longer than I thought it would be, so hope the TLDR and the conclusion helped you here, and this might help you to actually make a little more of an informed decision with the weapons. So hope you enjoyed the video, and see you guys next time.